Hello, good afternoon everyone. A very warm welcome to you all joining us today at our Thoughtful Thursday session. My name is Aisling McDowell. I'll be hosting today's session, and before I hand over to my colleague and our speakers for today, just going to run through a few bits of housekeeping. So as with all our Thoughtful Thursday webinars, this session is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto our website as a learning resource. Anyone attending today who isn't a panelist won't be on screen and your microphones are muted. I will be monitoring our Q&A and chat box, which is down the bottom of the screen, throughout today's session. So any comments, queries, anything you'd like to contribute, please put them in either of those boxes, and we will hold some space towards the end of the session for Q&A. Anyone who is joining us today who doesn't wish to receive any further emails regarding our sessions, you can let me know in the chat or by email. And I think that's it for the housekeeping. So I'll now hand over to Zibby. Zibby is our Cuimhne coordinator, and she'll say a few words and hand over to our speakers for today.
Thank you, Aisling. Hi, everybody. A warm welcome to our Thoughtful Thursday today from Irish in Britain. We organise these as part of a Cuimhne programme. Cuimhne is the Irish word for memory, and Irish in Britain, we run a lot of training and support for carers and around dementia inclusion and support for organisations. And today we're delighted to welcome two speakers, Paul and Aidan, who are coming to talk to us today on protecting ourselves and the people we care for from fraud, scams and financial abuse. To introduce them very briefly, Aidan McAllister has over 20 years of experience in the voluntary sector and in the care industry. He has experience himself in caring for relatives, and following that experience, he co-founded something called Guardian Card, which he will also tell you about. And we also welcome today Paul Smith. Paul is a former police officer. He's coordinated multi-agency work. He's a qualified forensic accountant, and he's keen to support people who may be at risk of losing their life savings to unscrupulous friends or family members. And we welcome both Aidan and Paul today. I'm going to hand over to Aidan now. Thank you, Aidan.
Good afternoon. So my name's Aidan McAllister, and yes, I'm one of the co-founder of Guardian Card. And I'm going to run through a presentation which will cover off a little bit about Guardian Card, but really about fraud and the risk of fraud to our sort of ageing community, a lot of which was based on my experience with mum particularly. So I will go straight into that. And oh no, I need to come back and I need to share my screen. And I've managed to do that without losing all of you. Sorry, bear with me, everyone. Let's press share. That's better. Let's start. Can everyone see that? Okay. I'll take it unless I hear anything that's okay.
It's perfect. We can see that. Thanks.
That's great. Okay. So yes, today's presentation is really about simple steps you can take to protect yourself. More importantly, probably to protect others who are either related to you or you work with within various care agencies from financial abuse. As introduced, as myself, my background has been working with the non-profit sector for a long time. Worked with a number of charities who are specifically around older life, worked with a number of Age UKs, worked with Silverline on services around reducing loneliness and isolation. And I also still currently work as a consultant with a safeguarding company as well. Paul, I'll steal your thunder, and when you come in, I'm sure he'll explain more, but I met Paul in my role in safeguarding as well, and Paul's obviously, as you can see there, got a very serious police background, and we've worked together on a number of projects around the escalation of financial abuse, and we'll talk about how it starts and where Paul ends up having to pick up the pieces of some quite really serious cases. Very briefly, what is Guardian Card, or what's the point of Guardian Card? The idea for Guardian Card came when I was sort of dealing with mum in the last 2 or 3 years before she went into residential care. She was very sociable, wanted to be out there, wanted to be going to the shops, wanted to chat to people, but she was incredibly forgetful with her Lloyd's card or whichever bank she was with. I would regularly get the phone call from the co-op saying, we've got it again. In some cases, she'll wait at the cash point for one of her friends to come along to save her getting out of the buggy. And we were fortunate in that she never got sort of defrauded badly. She never got ripped off, but she was very, very open to abuse just because of her sort of sociability and her active lifestyle. And my co-founder, Nick Thompson, who's not on today's call, but Nick had his mother-in-law who was being defrauded and was having money taken from her, actually from technically a family member. So what we want with Guardian Card is we want our elderly parents, we want them still out there, we want them to go to the shops, we want them to go to the coffee shop, go for meals in the pub, whatever. But by using a Guardian Card, you are reducing your exposure, reducing your risk. So, you know, an elder person might lend their HSBC card to someone who could go to the bank and take 20 quid out for them, and they could come back with the 20 quid and give it to them. But what they could also notice that is in that current account, it could be, you know, tens of thousands of pounds. With a Guardian Card, you load it with the amount of money that you think you or your mum or dad or your elderly relative is going to spend, and they can't spend any more than that. More importantly, if a bad person comes into their life and manages to get hold of their PIN through coercion or bullying or whatever way, first of all, you would see every transaction on the app because you're keeping a watching eye over that account. And most importantly, they can't take out any more that's in there, which is different if they are financially defrauding someone via their normal bank account. And Paul will probably touch a little bit on that later on. It also allows second, third, and even fourth parties. So perhaps mum would have a card, a son could have a card, carer number 1 might have a card, carer number 2 might have a card. And all of the transactions that they're making, if they're popping out to get a bit of shopping for mum, or they're doing some bits and pieces, all of that information comes up onto the app in real time. So, you know, I could be sat here in Bournemouth where I live and see that 20 quid's been taken out of the bank from my mum and she might be in Cambridge. And that's fine. I know that's the day that the carer goes in. But I could see a transaction taking place at another time, which I think, well, that doesn't make sense. That's, you know, that someone spent something in a coffee shop in Birmingham and mum's going to be nowhere near there, nor are the carers. So you suspend the card and you investigate what's going on. So we launched just on 3 months ago, very early days for us. And, you know, our customers are quite varied. Typically it's someone between 40 and 60 who is now getting involved more and more in their parents' care. But also it is the care agencies who are now, you know, providing these as part of their service. Residential care, care homes are now providing these as part of the residential package, so they don't have quite so much cash on site, which can be a bit unwieldy if you've got a residential care home with 40, 50 people. That it's not great to have loads of money flying around that organisation. And also we're talking to housing associations who see a Guardian Card being used, yes, for their older residents who might be living in sheltered, but also it's got an application for vulnerable adults who are living in supported housing, where a typical bank account might not be appropriate. And all of the flags and all of the visibility, it's very easy to spot if a vulnerable adult, particularly a vulnerable young adult, might have started being perhaps cuckooed, or he's being bullied, or he's being coerced into handing money over to the bad person. So prior to launching Guardian Card, we did a whole load of research into financial fraud, not just for the elder demographic, but in general. And it really is shocking what we found during that research. You know, I won't go through every line, but to know that 1/4 of people over 70 have suffered some kind of financial abuse is really quite scary, especially when you look at the average, the people who have been abused, the average that it comes out at in terms of cash. Professional scammers are still, and probably always have been, I guess back in the day they would have been called con men, but professional scammers are still the primary perpetrators. Other victims who have not just had financial abuse direct or money taken from them, but they've been missold services or investments, trusting people who are supposed to be acting in their best interests. And sadly, they've had family members steal from them as well, or family members also coercively start changing wills, changing power of attorney, and moving much bigger sums of money over. A lot of people are using someone else to look after their finances, which we'll come on to later, which is actually a really great thing if you've got someone that you implicitly trust, if they have that legal authority. But also we are spotting a lot of people who are just having relatively new on the block friends who are starting to help them with their finances and with their shopping during the pandemic. And I always think, the best of people, and if they're doing that because they've got absolutely the right intentions, well, what a great thing that is. Unfortunately, not everyone has the right intentions. And particularly in the last sort of 15, 16 months, where people have been, in a lot of cases, older people have been locked behind their front doors. They've had more people cross their threshold to help. The more people crossing their threshold to help, that ups the percentage of potentially one of those people not having their best intentions at heart. And it's, as such, it's their biggest fear is it's higher than poor health, it's higher than loss of independence. And as you can see, the sums across the country and the individual averages once someone is being defrauded really are quite high. And I think Paul, if you want to come on mic quickly, I think you'll find in your experiences that there are some incredibly large amounts that are taken from people. I'm not sure if Paul got on that one.
Yeah, so absolutely, yes. As I say, it starts in very small figures and it builds up. And I've got a couple of particular cases that I dealt with as a police officer, where we talk about £200,000 or £300,000, and these people certainly would, before they started dipping into grand sort of savings, they hadn't even got a parking ticket. So it kind of steers people into a criminal route, from just sort of stealing the odd £10 here and there, and then it kind of builds into massive figures, as you suggest. Yeah,
it's temptation, and almost that, like you said, the £10 here or there can be a gateway, and if we're not spotting it as family or friends or as the relevant agencies, then those people pretty soon realise, well, if no one's noticing 10, then I'll make it 20, and then it continues there. So it is a big problem. There are certain factors which make an older person more vulnerable to certain types of abuse. And, as we were chatting before the session started, fraud is increasing across the board. Young people are victims of fraud, working age people are victims of fraud, and so are older people. But older people have slightly accentuated vulnerabilities. They are seen as a soft target and seen as easily exploitable. So there is a greater concentration on older people from fraudsters than there might be on people of working age. So just on the law of numbers, they're going to be, I was going to use the word attacked, but they're going to be approached more often than a working age or a young person, because they're seen as soft targets. They don't always report these events because there's a sense of embarrassment sometimes if they feel they've been ripped off, if they feel they've made a decision that really in the cold light of day was not a good one. They might not want to say that to their family. They might not want to say that to their friends. So it goes unreported. In some cases, if the person committing the crime is working closely with them as a potential friend or carer or family member, then there's almost a sort of strange loyalty to that person, because they might be relying on that person for an awful lot of their day-to-day activities, and indeed that person could be the one person stopping them from being completely lonely. So they don't always act in the same way that you or I might if we spotted someone who we thought was going to nick our car or something. It's very complicated, these relationships. And as I said, sometimes they'll look to protect them even though they know they should report them. The vulnerability, you know, the older one gets, if one's starting to get a bit confused, then they will be preyed on even more. They will be, coercion is a big issue. Coercion from the family is a big issue. So family members might be vying for, you know, who's going to get the big prize at the end, who's going to all of a sudden appear on a will, even though that sort of second cousin hasn't been seen for 35 years. And as people get older, they can be influenced a lot easily, or more easily than perhaps, you know, you or I of working age. And going back to the sort of embarrassment, they won't necessarily always want that third party intervention. And the final point, again, sort of stays with coercion. If you have someone, you know, if you are old, if you're alone, if you're lonely, and you have one person in particular who is around you, who is helping you, who is keeping you company, that type of behavior can almost make you feel like if that person isn't there, I might not be able to eat, I might not be able to get my food, I might not have anyone to talk to. And therefore, you know, Paul, I'm sure you'll explain coercive behavior better than me, but then there's such a reliance on that person that the victim will perhaps overlook the odd indiscretion. Am I right in thinking that, Paul, without them knowing that the big deal is going on in the background of the bigger theft?
Oh, totally. Yes, yes. I've seen it many, many times. Yeah, coercive controlling behaviour, it just sort of runs through everything that I kind of have been involved with. It's that power imbalance between perpetrator and victim.
Mm. So how do we, you know, are there ways that we can decrease a person's vulnerability to abuse? Or I think, you know, the best thing ever is to have a good, strong family relationship and network near to you and around you. And of course, we don't live in a world where everyone is living in the same town where they grew up, where their mum lives and where their nan lives. It tends not to happen like that. But even remotely, having a strong family and friend network is good. You know, if those people are all trusted, they're all keeping an eye out, and they're all keeping an eye without them realizing it. They're keeping an eye on each other as well. So that an active social life, a good circle of friends, all of these things keep people out there. If you've got a good social life as an older person, you're going to talk about certain things that are going on. You're going to make your friends more aware. You're going to become more aware that, oh, I've had a text from the NHS saying I've got to enter my bank card for a coronavirus test. Well, we all know that's not something you would do, but an older person might not necessarily know that. They could be really scared about this situation. And if they're chatting to their friends, there's lots of good home truths that can come out socially over a bit of a laugh. But when they then receive that text message or they receive a phone call, they're aware, no, that's a scam. I'm going to put the phone down now. So a good circle of friends, being in a wider community, which obviously is what the third sector does. It does so much work to keep people engaged and keep them active and keep those community bonds going when they can, to avoid the person being seen as totally isolated. You know, a fraudster is going to pick his victim very carefully, and if he spots someone who has no social interaction, has no family coming round, you know, and this fraudster could be living next door to your gran for all you know. He could be in the flat next door, and he may know that there's no one coming round, and so that, as far as the fraudster is concerned, that's a good potential victim. You know, their risk factors are low. Community facilities, which obviously you guys get massively involved in, and to bring those people into those facilities helps. keep independent, keep active. You know, like I said at the beginning with Guardian Card, we want people to be out there shopping. We want there to be out there talking to people, keeps them fit, keeps them healthy, stops the loneliness. And, you know, during those interactions, they have to go out and spend money on various things. Let's just make that as safe a way as possible. And again, if they can get access to relevant information, whether it's through community groups, whether it's through family, it's really hard sometimes with the amount of false information they receive, or we all receive, you know, to sort out the wheat from the chaff. But if there are trusted groups that they belong to, like yours, with local community groups, local age groups, then I think there needs to be, and I'm sure there already is, a focus on, you know, without scaring people, but a focus on how, you know, how can you help them. So, oh, you're not on mute.
Oh, sorry, I could go. Yeah. I said, how much?
Okay, so we've mentioned some of the scams that are around, and actually these certainly aren't all purely aimed at the elder community. There's just, on a pro rata, almost percentage wise, there's a better chance of some of these landing with older people, whereas some of the tech scams, you know, younger people, working age people will be much more susceptible perhaps to phishing emails and text, etc. Older people might be more susceptible to the current vaccination scams that are going on. You know, working age people will probably be more likely to click on a HMRC text that's come through regarding perhaps an overdue tax payment, whereas the older person might be more likely to do a written reply to a letter that's come through claiming or stating that they're entitled to an increased benefit perhaps, or to an addition to their pension. The method of communication from the fraudster will vary according to the demographic that they're going at, but there are some. The coronavirus one has been particularly hard hitting on older people. Dating and romance scams are particularly hard hitting on older people, especially when loneliness kicks in. So, you know, as far as the people who create these sort of dating scams go, their target audience, very sadly, you know, in the way that their minds work, but their target audience is someone who's recently been widowed. That's how they work. They'll have that data. You know, a lot of that data is in the public domain. They'll go through the newspapers and pick up, you know, in the recent who's died recently, whether it's a local press or national press, and they target them, and that's, you know, probably always been the case, but there's the ability to do it in volume an awful lot more now. Copycat websites, that really affects people of all ages, to be honest. You know, that is where you think you're on Amazon, but actually you're on a fake site of Amazon. And so there are things that you can do to reduce your risk on that, which we'll come on to in a sec. I'm just aware that I'm doing lots of chatting. If there's any questions, please fire away, guys.
There's none yet. Thanks, Aidan.
No problem. No problem. I shall press on. Okay, so what can we do to be helping protect our loved ones and ourselves? I always say and ourselves, because like I said, this isn't unique to older people, but they're just more vulnerable, unfortunately. So I think if your parent or your grandparent has reached a certain age, I think it's good to understand and to talk to them about, certainly around their finances. You know, try and understand where the weak spots are. Where do they have, you know, certainly within the home, do they still have cash money? Do they still have valuables which could potentially be much better off in a more secure location? But also to understand or to start the conversation around, you know, if you're making any changes to anything financial, if you're having a conversation with anyone, however nice they may be, maybe bring in your daughter, maybe bring in your son into that chat. Maybe it's time just to make sure we all know who's got power of attorney. Has, you know, putting guardian card to one side, have you got, you know, does mum or dad or does gran have online banking, and can you be as power of attorney, can you get access to that so you can start help spotting anything that's going on in their world. So that's the first thing we do. Remaining vigilant all round, not just with financial fraud, but for who is beginning to get involved in their lives. I think that's really important. A really difficult one is, you know, not giving out financial information on the phone. One of my fears always with mum was she was from that generation where if the phone rang, she would, number one, always answer it. And even though I might be in the background, it's a salesman, get rid, she would start talking, natural inclination, very sociable, start talking. And even if the phone rang and she missed the call, she'd find out the number and then she'd ring them back. It was like sometimes almost being sort of served up on a plate to the fraudster. She'd ring them back. And we need to sort of work with our parents and with our grandparents to just coach them a little bit about who might be calling and what never to tell on the phone. Never give any financial information, never give bank numbers, never give sort codes. If in doubt, put the phone down. Or if in doubt, get one of your adult children to look into it. Involving another person in the financial admin goes back to the first point. It's really important that if you have that trusted family relationship, and the progression has started where perhaps mum or dad are now having, you know, they're having domiciliary care come into the house, so they're on a journey whereby they're slowing up, things are going to happen. It's time to start getting finances in order to a degree. Apart from anything, you know, and again, I quote myself as a point in case, if you are not sort of helping mum and dad with those finances, then when it comes to that next step of care, so your domiciliary care could come from being one visit maybe a week to do some cleaning, to one visit a day, to, you know, once you're up to 3 or 4 visits a day, you're up, you know, if you've got the wherewithal to pay, you're up at sort of £1,500. The next step after that could well be residential care. And people make those decisions, yeah, quite rightly, they make them in crisis to get the best care for their parents, but actually there's some awful financial services out there around paying for that care, around signing the house off, about creating an equity release system so that care can be paid for. These things need to be looked at really carefully. And there's almost a bit of a responsibility on us, that generation, to help our parents with it and not to do it in crisis at the last minute. If you're using something like a guardian card, then fantastic. You can then get a secondary person to do day-to-day spending. You could have a carer who is coming into mum's house and knows that on a Tuesday, you know, she will need some more milk on a Tuesday, she'll need some bread. And actually, a good regulated care organisation will never go and use mum's money or mum's card. They will either have to go and buy it for them and reclaim it in a very convoluted way, or they'll actually put mum into the car and take them to the shops with her, which is fine sometimes, but maybe not on other days. And apart from anything, if you have a carer do that, the care agency is going to charge you for the time, because it's probably an hour's trip, even if it's the shops down the road. So if you can have a second person on the account, whether it's a guardian card, or if you've got power of attorney for your parents, or if you've got power of attorney as an authority or as a legal entity, then you can do those bits and pieces for them. Simple things which, you know, even I'm trying to teach my kids, let alone what our elder generation did. Be careful how you dispose of receipts. That there's information and data on there. Be careful what you do when you are ripping up junk mail, because the junk mail will have mum's name and postcode on it. Inside the junk mail, actually it wasn't junk mail, it was a letter from the bank. It was a statement, and the person going through that ripped up junk mail has now got access to not just your grandfather's address, he knows his sort code, he knows his account number. So he's a long way down the road of being able to defraud him. If you're finding that, for example, your elderly parents or people in your community are being really hit hard by over-the-phone scammers, talk to BT, talk to your provider, get the number delisted. So you know, I think back in our day it was called X directory. It just means that no one can then find you. But the systems, and I've got a background in telecoms, the systems for being able to mass produce cold calls are very sophisticated these days, and they will draw that data down from the telephone network companies. But if the number isn't available to Joe Public, it isn't available to any data harvesters, as we call them. So you're immediately reducing unwanted calls into an elderly person. And certainly our research, and certainly my knowledge, is that the people who will call an elderly person will tend to be quite a small, tight group of people. It'll be friends, family, might be the local church, might be the care groups, but you know, those people have dad's number. And if anyone else needs it, yeah, give them the number, but minimize the risk, minimize the people who are talking to them. Similarly with protecting against identity theft, this is really relevant to the working generation and to young people, probably even more so than the older generation. You know, this is just changing passwords. It's making sure that every device that you have is secure. And yes, a lot of older people will have those devices, but that's a classic way by which they are in. You know, good hacker will know if you're using the same password for everything. We've all been told it 1,000 times, and still we don't do it. But if you're using the same password for everything, you'll suddenly get an email one day saying, "I know your password is X," and that means you know they'll probably ally to that email a blackmail fraud. Because that's how they work, but they've picked up through their systems that you're hitting the same keystrokes each time, and that continually comes up, and they're in, and then you've got a problem. Again, simple stuff. Tell mum and dad or gran if it's a cold caller, and yeah, we all put the stickers on the doors, but cold callers aren't fussed about that if they're malicious, you know. In the same way, I'm sure from Paul's experience, you could have neighbourhood watch stickers all over a neighbourhood. A burglar's a burglar. He's not that community orientated. So it's the same with cold callers. And you know, there's physical devices that you should potentially be thinking about for your elderly relatives, whether it's mum or gran or granddad, or whether it's people who come under your care, if you're operating as a housing association or a local authority or as a charity. Yeah, just latches, key safes, all sorts of stuff, just making sure that the front door and the back door are secure. And you and your family don't always have to pay for those. You can always be means tested by the local authority to see if those sorts of things can be provided for you. But again, you know, a lot of what we're talking about today is about sort of the financial, invasive financial fraud that goes on, but you still want to stop the guy getting over the front door physically as well. So what I'm going to do on the last slide, which is what to do if affected, I'm going to hand over to you, Paul, if I could. Just there's always been a couple of questions in my mind. I think people these days are, and not older people, but people in general are not scared, but they're not entirely sure who to contact if they think something is going on. So from my point of view, you know, if my father-in-law is, I think, potentially getting either scammed online or he's getting phone calls from a consistent risk, do I call the police? Do I call the local authority? Do I have to manage this myself? Who do we go to?
I would do both, because if it's a safeguarding matter, the local authority should be made aware anyway. And if someone has a designated social worker, then obviously they'd want to know. and they'd work in conjunction with the police anyway. And kind of as a belt and braces, when I was a police officer, and if people phoned the police, I'd say, have you made a complaint or made a referral to the local authority? I will be informing them anyway, but it would help if you made a parallel report. It just, you know, as I say, it's belt and braces, just make sure that the right people are dealing with it. So, you know, the local safeguarding unit would be the people that would be responsible if the person kind of lacked capacity to, you know, look after them, to manage their finances and look after themselves. And generally that would be dealt with as, you know, a police local authority matter. If it was a crime, you know, if it was an out and out fraud, then it would be police would lead, but the local authority would provide that sort of safeguarding support. If it was just some concern over, you know, the vulnerability of the individual, then the local authority would probably lead on that. So if it's a fraud, action fraud, as you've said, you know, on the screen, but the police should be made aware as well.
And what do you do in circumstances? So say, for example, a long lost relative or an old neighbour or friend has become more and more involved in Gran's life, and all of a sudden you find that this person has been given something like power of attorney.
Yeah.
What's the criminality element? And it's been done maliciously, because what happens is that finances go in that person's direction. Where does the family stand, and where does an organisation, perhaps a community group or a charity who's trying to help those people, where do they stand in that?
I mean, you know, I can't, you know, recall the amount of times that I've said to people, you know, I'd rather you report it and the police, you know, were allowed to sort of assess it, the local authority, than not. You know, there's this kind of feeling where people think that someone would have reported it, someone's bound to have reported it, but then nobody actually ends up reporting it. And I just get so frustrated over that. And when I actually did my dissertation for my master's degree, and this is obviously the subject area, you know, one of the bits of academic research that I looked at was what's called the bystander model. So where, you know, someone visiting a vulnerable person's home, you know, as I say, you know, a nurse or a district nurse or a social worker, they kind of make the assumption that someone else has kind of made that report. Yeah. And I've been so frustrated in my policing career that, you know, people have visited and have seen things going on, and they've either thought, well, actually, it's not my job to report it, but actually, if nobody reports it, nobody's going to know. Yeah.
Yes, that's always one of the things that comes up with some of the people that we've spoken to prior to launching Guardian Card, is who can be a guardian in terms of legally. And then if you've got, I was also talking to a gentleman from an organisation who represents older people who don't have immediate family. So it's all, you know, and that person could well have a house, could have an estate, could have an awful, you know, which it's got to go somewhere. And they are indeed preyed upon, because it goes back to what I was saying, I think, about if someone is in the flat next door and knows that the old lady next to him doesn't get any visitors, or rarely gets any visitors, then, and he happens to be a fraudster, then that's a prime target. And I guess it's what, Fiona, what you guys do in the community sort of outreach that you do, is to try and, I guess, identify those people and all people of vulnerability.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a bit of a question actually for Paul around that, because action fraud are inundated, obviously, because there is a lot of this going on at the moment. But I think really, from my point of view, if somebody reports it, will the police take it seriously? Because I think a lot of it is they're a bit scared to report it in case, well, one, they feel bad that they've been scammed, but two, where will it go? You know, like, will there be a follow-up? Will the police spend some time with that person? You know, will they support them maybe with a checklist of things to do, or have a chat with them? You know, That's kind of, you know, one of the questions that I think is quite important.
Do you know, I'd love to say, Fiona, of course they will, but it is a bit of a postcode lottery. You know, as a sort of private consultant now dealing with these matters, I've found similar issues throughout the country. I'm talking from like Manchester down through to the South Coast and Cornwall. And it all depends on the officer and the officer's experience and training. If you're lucky enough to get the right person, they'll take it forward. Others will just kind of see it as this is a civil matter, it's not for the police. And this is kind of where I generally come in. With my experience, I can say, this is not a civil matter, this is a criminal matter, and this is something you should be looking at. Yeah, I've had arguments and kind of, sometimes I've won, sometimes I haven't, but policing is in a different place than it was when I left 4 years ago. You know, they've lost numbers, they've lost people with a correct skill set. They're redressing the balance, but you know, you've just got to be quite forceful, I think, at times, and try your best. That's what I can say.
No, thank you.
Positive. It's not very positive.
But you would still say it's worth reporting.
Oh, totally, 100%. Yes, okay. definitely.
Is there any evidence to prove that if you, so say you've got the stuff I was talking about, like the lower level temptation fraud, where something's going on, and yes, mum might not want to report that at all, but if you are the son or the daughter, if you report, right, I'm going to report this person, I'm going to tell the local police, they might take forever to come out, and they might. Is there evidence to prove at least that sort of message has been fired across the bows of that person?
Yeah,
and if they're not really good professional fraudsters, that just chances, if that's the right word, they might run off and try someone else.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And you know, the intelligence is then recorded for the police, and if something else then happens with another individual, they'll connect the dots. Yeah, so, yeah, always report it. Yeah,
so if the same name is coming up in the same town, even if it's only a couple of £100 here or £50 there,
yeah,
and unless they're fools, they should realise that they're getting marked. Bear with me, sorry folks, I've heard a phone ring.
That's all right, no worries. Just while Aidan's away briefly, Mary, our panellist, would like to ask a question, so I might just bring her in now. That's okay. Just bring you in there, Mary.
Hi, Aidan or Paul. I'm not sure who is the best person to answer this. Is there a formal or a semi-formal way of taking care of somebody's finances without taking full power of attorney?
Over to you on that one, Paul.
Yeah, power of attorney is obviously the correct route, and that gives you that authority. Something that I wouldn't advocate, you know, if the person is a trusted friend, relative, then they can become a third-party signatory on a bank account. That's kind of fraught with concern for me. Power of attorney, or you know, if the person's on sort of receiving benefits, then you can have an appointee to look after their finances. And you know, if you're going down the lasting power of attorney route, there is a bond that can be purchased now. So if things do go wrong, you know, it's like an insurance type policy whereby the person can get sort of some recompense if things go horribly wrong. And for the appointee, you know, DWP, Department of Work and Pensions appointee, there is a similar bond that's available for anybody who's looking after the finances through that route. I don't know if that answers your question, Mary, but
yeah, I think it does. I mean, we have issues in the Irish community around power of attorney, about handing over the power to relatives, and some people are reluctant to do it, and some families are actually reluctant to take it on. So I just wondered if there was an appropriate way, and you know, the third-party signatory, as you say, is problematic.
Yeah, I mean, what I would advocate with a power of attorney, and ironically, I'm fairly friendly with the former senior judge from the Court of Protection, a guy called Denzel Lush, and he was against the lasting power of attorney because at that time there was no sort of bond in place. But you know, if in his view and my view too, if you have to go down the lasting power of attorney route, then you should consider a family member and perhaps a professional. It's probably, you know, bringing more expense in, but then you've got the safeguards. Everybody's covered then.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Can I just answer that question from Anne Jervis? Yeah, so when should the lasting power of attorney be set up? Well, you've got to do it before the person lacks capacity, because once the capacity is then lost, mental capacity to manage their finances or their own welfare, then you know, the default position is a deputyship. So it's best to have these things in place sooner rather than later. We're just going through a process with both my in-laws. My mother-in-law just had a quite a serious stroke, so we're having that put in place. They both got their mental faculties, but there are major welfare issues for both of them. So, you know, perhaps we should have done this years ago as a family, but now they're in their late 80s. Where all the forms have gone off.
It's a difficult sort of, the whole time of life issue around all of these financial decisions is difficult because it tends to coincide quite often with physical issues, which we tend to want to deal with sort of clear and present up front. Okay, I'm going to get a grab rail put in. I'm going to do something about the front door. I'm going to have to get a care in for Dad now he's on his own. I'm going to have someone come in once a day to help him with his tablets, and those things are being addressed. But you know, side by side to that, people should be thinking about his financial security for the future. You know, you're going to be able to keep Dad in that house, hopefully. If not, you've got to start making some decisions. But also, if you're addressing the risk around health, around falls, around the setup of his bathroom, you know, why wouldn't you address the risk around all that money he worked hard and paid tax on, and just for someone to stroll in and start helping themselves with? So I saw a question come up there and then it
dropped down again.
Yeah, there's a question that we have had coming in, which is whether you think it's a good idea to talk about fraud in the community, or whether that actually causes a lot of anxiety for people. So this is from a community organisation wanting to know what it can do to support, you know, its members and families in the community, but how do you start a conversation about fraud without making people scared?
Double-edged sword.
Yeah, I think when you sort of say fraud within the community, or even worse, if you say it within a community, then there might be an assumption that you're talking about that immediate community, whether it's based on locality, whether it's based on ethnicity, whatever. I think for me, the bigger picture is an understanding, from trying to put on the earlier slides, that fraud as a rule is increasing within whatever area of the country geographically. It's increasing across all the sort of age demographics within the country, but the most prevalent, the easiest victims will still be the older generation. So yeah, using the word community can be difficult, because you are sort of thinking, well, is someone going to think I'm saying this particular group have got an issue around fraud? It's massively generic. A target is a target, and a victim is a victim pool. I think is about right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of what I sort of talk about briefly, the work that I do, which is sort of interfamilial fraud, and what I present on, which is called the early inheritance syndrome, where you've got one sibling has looked after mum, dad for a number of years, been sort of, you know, living just up the road, and then the sibling who's been estranged suddenly comes into the parent's life and kind of pushes in and takes over. I've dealt with many of these cases as a sort of private consultant, and it's actually quite horrifying what happens within families. And it's just, you know, the power of attorney and that conversation early on is just so important. And, you know, it just prevents these opportunities for, you know, people seeing their inheritance disappearing before their eyes and want to get hold of it before the person passes away. And, you know, those early conversations, as Aidan suggested earlier on, are a must in my view.
How hard is it to prove coercive behaviour in sort of making up that power of attorney? So the person's still got capacity, and then the sort of the son who hasn't been around for 30 years, all of a sudden he's back, and he's decided to get mum to give him power of attorney.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult, but it's a matter of putting the evidence in context. So I've got I'm doing some work for a client this is a probate scenario where there was four wills. I won't go into too many details, but the last will had a codicil with it, which kind of put Will 2 in place, and Will 2 benefited 2 siblings and not my client. It got very messy, but you know, had proper protection been taken out early on and proper legal advice, my client wouldn't have been in the situation he's in. And it's such a sad scenario, really. But you know, the proper legal advice, and quite often the advice nowadays, if you're kind of making a will, I know I'm kind of jumping subject slightly, but if you're making a will, it's best to have a letter recorded with it, or better still, an audio recording that's locked away with the will, and that clearly sets out the person's wishes, and it kind of gives some idea of their mental well-being at the time that the will is made. You know, had my client's mother done this before she passed away, things would have been a lot easier to sort out now. But we are where we are with it.
Thanks, Paul. We just have a question here in the chat. I'll just put to both of you. The question is, I have known an elderly person unhappy with their family's input. They preferred others to help. Where do we go if they are adamant?
Well, it's all about their mental capacity. You know, if they've got the capacity, and this is where the social, you know, a good social worker comes in. You know, if they've got the capacity to say, I don't want the family involved, I want this person involved, then that's their right. You know, it's tough on the family, but you know, if it's their wishes and they can make those wishes, you know, they've got the capacity to make those wishes, then they should be allowed to do so. And you know, that's what when a safeguarding social worker, you know, does their work really.
I think also our research, and I spoke to Action on Elder Abuse, who've now been renamed We Are Hourglass, but they did a report with the UK Home Care Association. Is the sad fact is the vast majority of theft from an older person will be from the family, whether it's the immediate family, whether it's sort of not so immediate family, or someone who is, you know, a niece or a nephew, but actually isn't. And one of the things that the care industry struggles with and finds incredibly annoying, and that's what we talk to them about, guardian card and visibility, is that quite often if money goes missing, especially cash money, which I know is supposedly disappearing, but it's not, you know, if money or things go missing from Gran's house and there is a care program in place, the carers will almost always be blamed first when the stats prove that it'll be family. And to try and, you know, and that obviously ramps up when it comes to, I've spoken to residential care providers where they've had almost sons and daughters having fights in the car park because the care provider is saying, look, your mother now needs to go to nursing care. So it's in residential care. There's an uplift in cost to nursing care because it's far more intensive. Could be as much as £400 or £500 a week, depending on the part of the country. And you will have one of the family, the offspring, or even both saying, no, we're not paying, we're not having that. That's coming off our inheritance. And so it's a really difficult subject. And the whole area of power of attorney is really difficult. I guess if you're an organisation representing, so Irish in Britain, it could well be that family members, whether it's the children or the remote family, could be in another country. It could be back in Ireland. Or, Paul does work, I know, with a lot of people whose parents are now living in Spain, and the family over here. Cross-border sort of power of attorney is incredibly convoluted. So that's, I think it's just visibility of everything from the very early stages, whether you are a family member seeing something going a bit dodgy, whether you're a community group and you're thinking, I think something's going on there. The message is really, if in doubt, it's call the police, isn't it, Paul? Call at the very start with the police at the very least.
Totally. Yeah,
you might get knocked around from that point onwards, but at least it's on the radar. And with opportunist thieves who are perhaps just there doing what they're doing because of temptation, who would never, like you said, Paul's dealt with some of these people who they've never even had a parking ticket before, and all of a sudden, for some strange reason, they've managed to get their hands on 200 grand's worth of an inheritance. That's temptation.
Yeah.
And if someone had picked them up at the 20 quid level, they probably would have gone, blimey, I need to stop.
Thanks, Aidan. We have another question here. Sorry, just says, my dad has a lot of unwanted calls coming through telling him that he has won money. What happens when you block a number?
So there's a couple of things you can do, sort of thinking back to my telecoms time. First of all, that telephone number, if it's in what we would have called the directory, it's in the public domain, so anyone can ring it. Obviously, people don't leaf their way through those big directories anymore. It's all online, and they have an automated system of doing cold calls. So whether the cold call is perfectly legit, even if it is annoying for double glazing, whatever, or whether it is a scam, it'll be on an auto dialer. And so you will have hundreds of numbers being dialed at the same time on the assumption that 99% of them aren't going to be answered. And then that's why sometimes you might get the phone ringing and you pick it up and there's no one there. It's dead air. That's an auto dialer where they just don't have the agent ready. But yes, so someone's father might be getting that call. So whoever his telephone provider is, as long as the family is happy for him to go X directory, then that number is no longer in the public domain. You can get systems with people like BT, which is essentially a call blocker. It's like a triage system where you would give to BT or you give to Virgin or whoever a list of numbers that, dad's going to get the calls from. It's going to be you, it's going to be your sister, your brother, it's going to be dum 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 dum. Might be as we all, it's normally sadly no number. It's probably about 10 to 20 numbers. Those calls, when they come in, will automatically go through to dad's phone. Any other numbers that come in can either be blocked or they can be triaged. The triage means it goes to someone within BT's call centre who says, yeah, I'm picking it up on behalf of so-and-so. Who are you? Do you want me to put the call through? And why are you calling? As soon as the agent hears that voice, they'll put the phone down. It's not worth it, because not only do they work on really tiny percentages of getting through, they then work on tiny percentages of being able to fulfill the scam. So they haven't got time or inclination to try and fight their way through someone who's trained to help block out the call. So yes, that's a very long-winded way of saying go X directory.
Yeah, actually there's a very good piece of work which was done jointly by Sussex and Surrey Police, but led by Sussex, called Operation Signature. Excuse me. And that was looking at vulnerable victims of fraud. And it's now been rolled out. The City of London Police and Action Fraud decided that this was a really good piece of work that needed to be rolled out nationally. Now, most forces, if not all forces in the UK, will know about Operation Signature, and a number of forces will be able to get access to free call blockers. So they will have sort of secured funding for a free device to be installed. But part of the Operation Signature process is, if this person is identified as particularly vulnerable because mental health, physical health, age, frailty, then they will get an automatic visit by a police community support officer or a police officer, and they will follow a protocol which will try and put these things in place like call blockers. operation signature. It's worth Googling. Excuse me. It's worth Googling. There's some really good YouTube clips which provide really good advice. I'm losing my voice and I've not done all the talking.
Whilst you are coughing, Paul, I'll ask you another question.
Go on.
Does that also happen with the post?
Yeah, well, you've got that. Yeah, they will look at the post, and that you're looking then at. Oh God, Jessica's. Is it Jessica's? There's a piece of work done by a lady whose mother was the victim of these postal scams.
Right.
And I think it's Jessica's story, something like it's Jessica's story. I have to Google it. But yes, the Royal Mail definitely, and trading standards are involved in that sort of thing. And it's just a case of monitoring, you know, flow of junk mail to an elderly person's address, and they'll identify spikes, and you know that sends off a trigger for a visit by trading standards in place. Sorry.
Sorry. Question was you coughing?
I'm going to come in here because we're at the end of our time now. But
oh, right.
Thank you to Aidan and to you, Paul, as well, and to everybody that's put questions to you. And you shared a lot of useful tips and advice, and it may have generated more questions that people may have. So to encourage anybody who has further questions to get in touch with us at Irish in Britain, and we'll do our best to help connect you with information. Thanks for joining, and please do look out for our next Cuimhne Thoughtful Thursday webinar, which we'll be advertising on our website.